Part 5. Jude. Chapter 32. It seemed that Dr. Mira wanted little to do with Jude after their rocky introduction meeting with Dr. Peterson and PhD candidate Riley. She skipped their next usual Friday lunch, and she didn't have anything to say about the stitches in his hand when she returned to the office the following Monday. Jude considered punishing Dr. Mira by lying back to her. He thought that lying about the mice, or the tissues, or even the clinical trial humans would get her attention. It would take a while for the lie to surface, depending on which drug he targeted, and how long its disease or side effects took for others to notice. He was still calculating on which would punish the director most when he discovered he didn't need to lie. The truth did a far better job. "Cassia is alive. You cheated," he said, when she toured herself through the animal trials lab. He didn't even look up from his clipboard schematic of the numbered glass tanks to say it. Her scent did the strangest combination of twitching larger, then collapsing in on itself, bruising darker, and illuminating with tiny lights. There were 2 other researchers in the room, whose confusion was a twisting motion in their expressions and the crescent around their signatures. "You can't possibly know that," Dr. Mira finally managed, and left. Jude continued marking down data. The next time she approached Jude, it was to take him to lunch. But it was on a Wednesday. It was his turn to feel confused. "PhD candidate Riley asked to have another meeting with you," she told him, which explained the presence of Riley's scent attached to her own uncomfortable, fluctuating signature. Jude's confusion switched to excitement in his chest. A chance to ask Riley about Cassia. But if the director was there, would she intervene? Yes, he realized, she would. She walked with him down the main hallway, touching her ID to a door box to open it to the less restricted offices and break rooms. It was a busy lunch. There was a pile of tangled smells, typical of a crowd of humans in a space that served food. Immediately distinguishable was Cassia's. It was attached again to Riley, who was sitting nearby at an otherwise empty table, 3 spaces already plated with food. Riley smiled and stood up to shake his hand again. Her scent performed a golden hiccup. Jude's Friday blood draws at Primia had each begun with Cassia's scent doing the same. It was for being happy, excited. Dr. Mira indicated for Jude to sit directly across from Riley, who immediately started talking. She launched into dozens of questions about his detection work and lab routines. Dr. Mira said little, her signature still reacting uncomfortably as she glanced around them. She relaxed when the conversation turned to Jude's cooking hobby. Jude wondered with frustration if there would be an opportunity to ask Riley about Cassia at all, when Dr. Mira's phone chimed with pink and yellow loops. "I'll be right back," she promised, and stood up, raising the phone to her ear and walking away. Jude immediately turned to ask, "Where is Cassia?" At the same moment, Riley leaned forward and exclaimed, "Jude, I know Cassia." There was a beautiful pause where they both held each other's eyes, and Riley's scent flashed with the golden hiccup again. She started speaking more quietly, bending closer to him. "Jude, I used to work with Cassia. She's my friend. She told me about you. I'm here to get you out, to bring you to her. Do you want to leave?" "Yes," Jude answered emphatically and began to stand up. No, wait." Riley urged him back into his seat. "I can't get you out today. It has to be Friday when I have more help. It's going to be too hard for just you and me. Dr. Mira won't want you to leave." Jude agreed. Dr. Mira would definitely not want him to leave. Riley continued quickly. "It will be up to you to get out of the building. I left a gift basket of food in your hab this morning. There are pastas and sauces and spices and cheeses, but Jude, at the bottom of the basket, below the tissue paper, there are 6 bombs. Do you know what a bomb is?" Jude nodded, having smelled many before in the chem labs of Primia. "Okay, good. Listen. Don't show them to anyone. They can't hurt you because you're a deline, and they won't kill humans. They'll just make them cough a lot and run away. You just have to pull a pin, but then it will fog on its own. Just keep holding on to it, okay? On Friday afternoon, you need to use the bombs and this to meet me outside the building." She poked him in the leg under the table with something, a plastic card that he put in his pants pocket. "Don't fight with people. Just use the bombs," Riley pressed. "My friends and I will be in a van waiting. We will all have a red ribbon, like the one tied to the top of the gift basket." "Will Cassia be there?" Jude asked. Riley shook her head. "Cassia will be waiting somewhere else. It's too dangerous." "Promise me that Cassia will be there, outside," Jude said, leveling his gaze at her, then sat up straighter as Dr. Mira returned. Riley's scent twinkled with tiny lights. Okay, Riley said. I promise. What do you promise? Dr. Mira said with a nice voice but a dark scent. PhD candidate Riley smiled, and her scent shifted to the rough texture of lying. I promise to teach Daniel how to make lobster ravioli when I start working here officially. It's less expensive to make this close to the coast. She nodded warmly at Jude, who nodded back. Thank you, he said. Jude couldn't focus on work for the rest of the day. When he returned to the hab, he found the gift basket on his kitchen counter, a thin red ribbon tied into a bow at its top, an assortment of food stacked in its center. He pretended to be sifting through the bags of pasta and jars of sauce, but was passing his fingers over the tissue paper below, confirming a count of 6 cylindrical shapes. There were cameras in the hab. People could watch him. It's how they knew to come clean up the broken glass last week. He couldn't take the bombs out yet. His own signature's texture shifted to lying as he began making food, which was strange because he was actually making food. His mind was just trying to pretend everything was normal. He would have to keep pretending until Friday afternoon. The problem was, on Thursday afternoon, things turned not normal very quickly. Chapter 33. It was 5 o'clock, the end of the work hours, when the not-safe men stepped into the animal trials lab. Jude froze, recognizing their scents from the van more than 8 years ago. There was the round shape with the grainy texture and the waxy sideways point. Both of them were carrying the scent of Dr. Collett. Other researchers were chatting nearby, throwing away their gloves and hanging up their coats. They were unaware that Jude's scent had blossomed into a dread of bruises and a surprise of blue freckles. The men were dressed in handler uniforms, but wore lying wrapped across their scents. One of them waved Jude forward. Come on, let's get you back. For a moment, Jude considered that they might be a part of Riley's plan, but she hadn't carried Dr. Collett's scent or mentioned him, and it was a day too soon. Where was Mike? Jude wasn't sure what to do next. He didn't have the bombs, but he still had the plastic card in his pocket from yesterday. One of the men put his hand down into his own pocket, and the smell of the long tilt sleep drug popped with a twist of his thumb. Jude connected their meaning and quietly hooked his coat on the wall before obediently walking forward. Together they left the animal trials lab, joining the group of staff clocking out for the day. Instead of turning toward the hab, though, the men steered him down a branching hall that was already empty. The sleep drug was uncapped again, and Jude's feet burst into a sprint. Hey! The men shouted and swiped at him. Jude ran to the next set of doors and spent all the time he'd gained passing the card over the security box and waiting for it to turn green. The men smashed into him and the opening door, then grabbed Jude by his shirt and twisted him to the ground. Jude swung out and hit one of them in the side of the face. He kicked the other one in the thigh. New people joined the struggle, asking what was going on, trying to pull the men apart. The needle pinched Jude somewhere on his arm, then was ripped out as he thrashed sideways. He felt the weakness in his joints as the partial dose took hold, and the men laid on his arms, panting. Thank you, the sideways point man told the staff who had gotten involved. He stood and tried to drive them off, while the round, grainy texture man pulled Jude's limp arms together to snap handcuffs around his wrists. We'll take him from here. Have a great night. But the staff didn't leave. More kept arriving. They were asking Jude, Daniel, what happened? Jude fought the sleep. Scents were turning blurry with the drug. He couldn't seem to make words. The men were angry now, shouting, Clear the scene! At the growing crowd. Then Dr. Mira appeared, and Jude hadn't known seeing her would ever give him the pink, foamy wash of relief across his signature. Real Virex security was summoned after the 2 pretend handlers failed to give a matching story. Everyone's signatures were lit with anxiety and surrounded by confusion. Dr. Mira's had been growing steadily larger, especially when she found the plastic card that had opened the doors. She thought the men had stolen it. Jude wobbled between asleep and awake. The bent tranquilizer needle was located where it had been flung down the hall. The handcuffs were eventually removed, and 2 of Jude's fellow researchers pulled him to his feet. They helped guide him safely to the hab on his drowsy legs and sat him on his bed, asking questions that sounded like they came from underwater. Someone took his shoes off for him. The hab door shut and locked. Jude let the sleep have him. Chapter 34. The next morning, Jude's watch bipped red bars at 7 o'clock to wake him. It was Friday. There weren't dreams last night, but his body felt mostly better. The long tilt had kept him from washing yesterday, so the first thing he did was take a fast shower. Next, he switched clothes and tied his hair back because he was too full of tiny lights to spend time braiding it. To be ready to find Riley in the afternoon, he slipped the bombs into his pockets. He hid them from the cameras by using the cupboard door, pretending to unload the food from the basket into the shelves. Lastly, he made coffee, pouring a cup for himself and a cup for Mike, even remembering to add sugar for Mike. He wanted to appear normal. At 8 o'clock, Mike didn't arrive to bring Jude to work. Nobody did. He waited beside the door, but it remained closed and locked. Jude couldn't even see out of it because of the covers Dr. Mira had placed over all the glass panels to keep him safe after the laws changed. He heard footsteps beyond them a few times as 8 climbed the minutes up to 9. The coffee on the counter turned cold. Jude sat at the edge of the bed for another hour, watching the door. When the clock reached 10, he looked up at the cameras instead, starting to really worry. He hadn't reported a virus, like the last time he'd been kept this late. This had something to do with the men yesterday. It had to do with Dr. Collett. 10 became 11. He paced. Dr. Mira was probably worried about keeping Jude a secret. Years ago, she admitted she was breaking the rules to protect him, then made him promise to never leave through doors without her or Mike. She warned him that people would kill him if they knew what he was. So why hadn't the men yesterday tried to kill him? Jude closed his eyes, thinking harder. Dr. Collett must have sent them to take him, because he was going to break the rules too. He probably wanted Jude to work in the chem lab again. Jude felt glad everyone was breaking the rules for what they wanted, because he was going to break them too and use the bombs to find Cassia. He wanted Cassia more than he wanted to be a secret, even more than he wanted to be alive. 12 o'clock. Noon. Riley hadn't said an exact time. She'd only said to use the bombs after noon. Jude had waited long enough. He pulled the pin out of the first cylinder and waited as the pressure of the aerosol filled the room with the smell of yellow and green needles. Nothing else happened. Minutes passed. Nobody came to the door. Jude's heartbeat quickened. The bomb couldn't open the door. That's why Riley had given him the card. He needed a human with a card to come and open it. He looked all over the room, at his bed, the cameras, the shower, the kitchen. Then, an idea fell in his head. He pulled the tissue paper out of the basket and ignited the electric stove. It took a minute to warm, then the tissue vanished in rapid, efficient flames that snuffed themselves out. Not enough smoke. Jude tried again, pulling over the papery basket, his pillow, sheets, and a pair of pants. Flames crawled up the corners first, then clutched at the rest of the pile. Black smoke bulged out and up. The Hab's alarm began to shriek and flash all around, erecting transparent orange pillars of adrenaline through Jude's signature. He didn't know it would get so big so fast, and he tried pulling the sheet down out of the pile. Instead of making the fire smaller, it jumped from the sheet into the carpet, where it hissed and curled. Jude backed away from the mounting heat. The Hab door opened. Jude barreled through, masked in the smoke, and tore the pin out of his second bomb. Alarms across the hallway joined in the Hab shrieking as the smoke hit them, and the ceiling sprinklers began shooting water to the ground. The water couldn't reach the fire in the Hab, but it made the researchers and staff start running away, the way Riley's bombs were supposed to. He followed the screaming people, his clothing soaked in a matter of seconds. People coughed, but not very much. The needles from the bomb were being pushed down by the water and collected into the puddle gathering at everyone's feet. Jude abandoned his second cylinder before it even finished fogging, and kept up behind the research teams as they ran down the main hallway. Mostly they were covering their ears or trying to keep water off their phones while they made for the cafeteria doors, which meant they wouldn't remember that he wasn't allowed out of them. Jude was almost there when he saw Dr. Mira and skidded to a stop. She was standing beyond the door, counting people and shouting to ask who was left. The sprinklers weren't spraying beyond her. Jude backed up before she could see him and waited behind the corner of a branching hall. Humans continued to splash out through the water, now up to their ankles. He waited until the last person stumbled out, hoping Dr. Mira would follow them. She didn't. Instead, she stepped through the doorway and shouted for him down the hall filled with water and noise. "Daniel!" She passed by his hiding spot without seeing him, running back toward his Hab, And Jude took his chance. He ran for the cafeteria doors she'd left open. Dr. Mira must have heard his feet crashing through the water because she yelled behind him as he crossed through to the cafeteria, sliding on the trail of water everyone had left along the dry floor. He headed for the hallway at its end where the researchers had gone. Jude was going to follow the scared smells they had left behind until he found outside, like Riley said. But 2 uniformed pairs of people burst through a door and started running toward him. They wore masks and dragged a long, flattened yellow tube with them. Jude thought of the men yesterday and took a panicked turn to the right. He was lost immediately. Dr. Mira was calling for him from around every corner that he left behind. The rooms he passed were empty or locked shut. He didn't have a card to open any, so when he hit the last locked door, he turned around. "Daniel!" Dr. Mira panted, finally catching up. She bent in half, sucking in air, but it still blocked his way out. She reached behind her back and under her coat. "You lied!" Jude shouted at her, pillared with orange. "I couldn't find Cassia," she said between breaths. "I tried. There wasn't record of a mate. No deline with that name." She pulled out the handcuffs from yesterday. Jude put his hand down his own pocket, finding the curve of the 3rd bomb. "Let me out." She shook her head. "They'll kill you, Daniel. They killed Mike. We found his body last night." Jude hesitated. Was she trying to trick him? Her signature was full of every scared and angry shape he knew, but clear of the rough texture. She wasn't lying, which meant Mike was really dead. Jude's signature bruised, similar to how his arms and back bore marks from Dr. Collett's men yesterday. Mike had taught Jude how to fold clothes and crack eggs. He'd showed Jude how to stretch his neck the morning after he'd bent it in his sleep. One year, he had even brought Jude a magnet for his fridge. He said it was a beach from his vacation. Mike was Jude's friend, even if he worked for the director. Dr. Mira suddenly leapt forward, trapping one of Jude's wrists in a cuff and knocking them both sideways. Jude flailed with the bomb, trying to free his other hand to separate the pin, but Dr. Mira had his arm and was bending it behind his back. She smashed his face into the ground. Blood started rushing from Jude's nose. Jude brought the bomb up to his mouth and ripped the pin free with his teeth. The yellow and green needles fumed upwards, and Dr. Mira choked. She staggered off him and ran into the wall. Jude rolled up, moving his hair from his face where it had come loose from the tie. One handcuff was attached to him, its partner dangling loose. All he could smell and taste was the wide curve of iron from the blood. It ran down his face and into his wet clothes, spreading from red to pink. The director was trying to crawl away, coughing and reaching out blindly. Jude dropped the still fogging cylinder next to her. Then he took her badge. He left Dr. Mira behind. The wet footprints from the staff evacuation led him out. Jude had to use the card a few times if the way was locked, but the distance to the last door was so much closer to his hab than he ever knew. It opened with a green click, and Jude dropped his final bomb. He stepped outside. Chapter 35. Outside was huge, like a dream. There wasn't a ceiling or walls. The floor was tiny pressed stones with yellow painted lines that just crisscrossed and didn't lead anywhere helpful. The air wailed with overlapping sounds as Jude wove between long red vans with flashing lights. Beyond them were more vans, maybe hundreds of them, all different colors and sizes. How was he supposed to find Riley's? Wet and dry humans were gathering everywhere in nervous clumps, calling for another. Jude hurried between the lines, ducking his way further from the building. When he found a row of tall, square plants, he stopped behind them to wipe his face with the bottom edge of his shirt and tried to loosen the metal on his wrist. It was biting him hard, making his hand red from the inside. The impossible amount of air above him still smelled like his own blood, and the sounds were stained orange from the echo of the alarms in his ears. But whispers of other shapes were coming through. He gave up on the handcuff and focused on putting more space behind him, trying to find Cassia's or Riley's signature. Then he saw a red ribbon. It wasn't tied to a person, like Riley said. It was tied to the branch of a plant. Jude crouched down and gently plucked it off before seeing a second flash of red on a plant further away. He put the first ribbon in his pocket, and then walked cautiously to the second one, then again to a third tied to a pipe sticking out of the ground. He jogged the gaps between the ribbons until he was around a long half-wall with plants that touched the sky. A few people saw him, but didn't chase him. They looked confused, even a little alarmed, but not angry. Jude continued beyond a short building with black and yellow striped bars held out to its sides, and climbed over a low concrete divider. When he stopped to catch his breath, relieved that more smells were breaking through, Jude saw 2 men ahead with matching red ribbons knotted on their wrists. When they saw Jude, their scents mutely hiccuped gold, and they waved him over. He couldn't detect if they carried Riley's or Cassia's signatures, but they looked relieved to see him. "This way," they said. Jude followed them along another long wall and behind a building. His heart was thumping for so many reasons and pounded harder when he started to catch the feathery swirl floating in the wake of the men. Cassia was close. When they turned a corner, he finally saw her. "Jude!" she cried and rocketed out of a van toward him, slamming into his chest. She squeezed his body and gripped his shirt like he would disappear from a dream. Her scent was awash with a storm of pink foam, flashing bars, and golden hiccups. Jude held her head and kissed her the way he dreamed of in all the years he thought she was dead. There wasn't enough of his body to put around her to tell her how much he loved her. He cried and ground his face into her neck, smearing blood across her freckles while he covered his own signature in her feathery swirl, promising himself he would never go anywhere without it. "Jude," Cassia finally laughed, face wet and happy. "We have to go now. Julian is waiting for us." "Who's Julian?" Jude asked, putting his forehead on hers, fingers in the hair at her neck. "Julian is our son." Cassia held his face in her hands too, eyes shining, signature golden. She tucked Jude's hair behind his ear. "He can't wait to meet you." Jude felt his whole world stretch with something too big to fit inside him. He stopped only paying attention to Cassia's scent to begin memorizing the small, blade-shaped signature that was writing it. It was like his own. It was beautiful. He followed Cassia's lead as she climbed into the back of the van. They were joined by the 2 men with ribbons, and 2 more who came running from the opposite direction. Riley got into the front, next to the driver. "What happened in there?" Riley asked Jude, once the van was moving. "Dr. Collett sent men yesterday," Jude told her. "Dr. Mira caught them, but she didn't want me to leave." "Damn, well, a break-in explains why we couldn't get past all the extra security this morning. We could have picked you up a lot closer without them," Riley told him, turning around in her seat. "Are you okay? You look awful." The woman driving the van moved it faster. While Jude explained the fake handlers who had killed Mike, the fire in the hab, the sprinklers, then Dr. Mira's grab for him, one of the friends found Jude a replacement for his wet, bloody shirt. Another dug through a bag on the floor for a tool that unclamped the handcuff. Jude's hand could breathe again, and he flexed it slowly while Cassia helped him clean the tacky streaks from his face, fingers gentle where he hurt the most. She handed him a bottle of water. To Riley, she turned her head and asked, "Why would the same men who took Jude from Collett be working for him?" Riley shook her head, upset. "Double agents, thugs for hire. We've had to suss out a few. I think the better question is, do you think Collett knew it was Jude in there? Or do you think he was willing to make a grab for any deline?" "Collett said he had to confirm an identity before extraction," Cassia bit her lip. "But Julian didn't give Jude away. Unless he risked sending the blood to a lab for DNA analysis, Collett couldn't know it was Jude so soon." "I think it's simpler than that, Cassie. I think Collett knew that you and Julian left home," Riley told her. Tiny lights winked into Cassia's signature, and her jaw muscles bunched. The friends murmured nervously. Jude interrupted to ask, "Where's Julian?" Riley answered him. "It was too dangerous to bring him to Virex. He's waiting with our partner. We're almost there. I honestly can't get over how much he looks like you, Jude. Did your other kids look like you too?" Jude admitted he had never met any of his other children. Once his mate gave birth, they were taken away. All the humans fell quiet, but their scent stretched out all around them. Cassia squeezed his hand. "Something's wrong," the driver said suddenly over her shoulder. They had pulled off the fast route and turned onto slower ones until they were behind another building. The second van parked there had its side doors wide open. A human body was half dragged out of it. "God damn it! God damn it! God damn it!" Riley yelled and jumped out of the forward seat. Cassia, Jude, and the friends clambered out of the back. Cassia cried and ran for the open doors, shouting past the body into the dark interior. Jude stopped behind her and inhaled, eyes closed and heartbeat rising. Dr. Collett's angry signature hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Chapter 36. Everyone was yelling. Cassia was yelling for Julian. Riley was yelling for God. The friends were yelling for their dead partner. Jude yelled at all of them to be quiet. He climbed into the van with the body and drew long, deep breaths in. The little blade-shaped scent was strong, but covered in orange pillars. Julian. The slab-like bowl shape was recent and was smeared in one handprint on the van's door, Dr. Collett. The strongest signature was the one belonging to the dead partner, flung everywhere in blood. The air stung with burnt powder. The partner had used the same kind of weapon Riley's friends wore under their shirts or held downward as they scanned the open space beyond their van. Jude followed the blade scent back out into the open space. Julian had run this way. He had been sweaty, and the place where he touched the building smelled of his salt. A large drop of Dr. Collett's blood was just around the corner. He had chased Julian. He wanted to take him. Jude began to run, head lifted, turning constantly, catching and sorting through thousands of colors, textures, and flashes of smells for the only two that mattered. He was followed by Riley, Cassia, and 3 of her friends. 2 stayed behind with the body. Julian had squeezed between a pair of strange vans covered in tools and equipment. He had touched one door, then placed his hand on the ground beside it. He had crouched here, crawled. The scent cut between the wheels. Jude circled to the far side of them and picked up the trail, like following the red ribbons. His son must have been smaller than any human he'd ever seen. His signature fit between parts of wooden walls, under equipment, and through a pipe whose bottom had suspended the scent in a puddle of water. Dr. Collett couldn't fit in the same spaces. He left smears and stripes of blood and sweat at the tops of walls, the rims of equipment, and the outer branches of tall plants. The trail fell off the edge of a slope, covered in growing things, their ripped-up roots exhaling diagonal, angry plant smells. Julian and Dr. Collett had both tumbled or scrambled down. At the hill's bottom, there was a churned-up area of loose, gritty ground, with 2 sets of footprints skidding out toward a flood of water that was as wide and deep as the sky. Jude had never seen so much water at once. The ceiling sprinklers had filled the hallways, but this water filled to the edges of his vision. Cassia, Riley, and Riley's friends sprung forward and followed the printed trail as easily as Jude had followed the scented one. It helped because the nearby water folded the wind around, scattering and overwhelming everyone's signatures. When the footprints entered the edge of the water, they were washed away flat. They had been heading toward a wall of large, crusty rocks. In the distance behind them all, the air was being chopped into thin rectangles. Jude looked backwards at the same time as Riley and saw a machine approaching from high up in the sky. "Fuck!" Riley yelled, and told one of her friends to turn around and get the van. She ran back, but everyone else raced forward, knee-deep through the water to get around the rocks. The sky machine overtook them, burying them in sound as it passed overhead. When they rounded the corner, it had stopped in the air, spraying wind outward. Dr. Collett was directly below it, waist-deep in the water, with Julian pinned under his right arm. With his left, Collett was waving up to the man in the sky machine. A rope dropped down. "Julian!" Cassia roared. Her hair danced like fire in the air. Then the man in the sky machine pivoted the end of a large weapon at Riley and her friends. Dr. Collett finally turned and saw Jude for the first time since the alcohol attack and evacuation of Primia. The shapes of his fear were replaced by a thick spread of greed as he reached into his belt and put a knife to Julian's neck. Julian thrashed against him. "Stop!" Jude screamed. An icy wave hit everyone through the legs, forcing them to reset their feet once when it pushed forward, then again when it pulled back. "If Jude comes with me, Julian lives," Dr. Collett shouted. The dangling rope whipped beside him. Riley and her friends were aiming their weapons at both Dr. Collett and the sky machine above him. A burst of color, like shattering glass, set Cassia's whole signature alight. Jude anticipated her a half moment too slow, and she leapt straight for Dr. Collett. As they collided, a tall, punishing wave of water swept everyone off their feet, rolling friends and enemies equally up its path into the rocks. Jude lost track of everything. His face was full of salt. For a moment, he couldn't even tell which direction to find the sky. Sounds vanished, then blasted back in pieces. He choked and staggered onto his hands and knees as the water dragged him backwards like he was paper. Others were faster to their feet, and the air cracked with sound as everyone below traded shots with everyone above. When he finally found the air, Jude saw Julian struggling to the surface next to him, washed free of his captor. Beyond his son, Jude saw his mate locked bodily onto Dr. Collett, the knife in both of their hands. Another wave crested above them, and they vanished beneath it together. Jude had just enough time to grab Julian before the same surge of water twisted them under too. He held tight as the water shoved forwards, then sucked backwards. The salt burned through his aching nose and behind his eyes as he collected Julian into his arms and scrambled up the rocky, tumbled slope, falling to his knees. Jude had never held a human so small. Julian had wrapped himself tight across Jude's chest, eyelashes dark and wet and squeezed shut. To Jude, he looked like Cassia. His signature was overwhelmed by a collision of pillars, foam, and lights. Their hearts thudded against each other's chests, their skin warm where they touched, and freezing everywhere else. Somebody fired again, but the sky machine was leaving, the noise of it widening. When Jude turned his head to look back, it was beyond the rocks, gone. Dr. Collett tumbled limply in the waves, face down. Riley and one of her friends were dragging Cassia free of the crashing foam. The water turned pink where it touched her. Chapter 37. The sky's lights had turned off. The inside of the van was quiet except for the hum of the ground they were leaving behind. Each person was lost in shadow, though when other vans passed by, yellow light flashed across their faces. The driver was staring emptily ahead. Riley's cheeks were glossy with tears. A friend had his head in his hands. Another pressed a bandage to their own leg where the sky machine's weapon had opened it. Cassia was lying flat across the van's floor. Julian was curled on her stomach, clutching her damp, stained shirt. At Cassia's head, Jude knelt on the floor, braiding his mate's hair for the final time. It was salty and tangled. She would have laughed and told him he could try again. When he got to the end, he didn't think he had anything to hold it together, then remembered the red ribbon in his pocket. Riley watched him pull it out and tie it at the end of her braid like a shoelace. Jude's fingers trailed up the weave to stroke Cassia's face. He remembered the day in the biolab when he'd only just met her. He had asked about the mark on her nose. "Oh," she'd laughed, embarrassed. "It's a scar. I got into a fight when I was a kid." "What is fight?" he had asked. "You've never been in a fight?" She teased him playfully, then told the story. It was so stupid. This girl in my class took my favorite pen right out of my hand. She'd been bullying me for so long, I finally decided to steal something back. It was some dumb keychain off her backpack. Anyways, we hit each other a whole bunch, and I got suspended from school. I probably should have gotten stitches, but I just kept putting bandages on it. Jude hadn't a clue what any of the words had meant at the time. He just liked the sound of her voice. Now that he had been hit, had taken things, had been in fights, and had watched wounds become scars, he understood them more clearly. Cassia's final fight wouldn't scar. There weren't stitches or bandages enough to fix it. At least she had made sure Dr. Collett got worse. They had left him in the water. The sky machine hadn't even come back for him. Jude didn't know what to do next. He closed his eyes and put his forehead on hers, breathing in all of Cassia's signature before it would fade away forever. He smelled past the salt. He smelled past Dr. Collett's blood. He smelled past her last moments of fear, rage, then her shattering courage. He inhaled until underneath it all, the only smell was the human he loved at its center, the feathery swirl. Someone tapped his arm. When Jude opened his eyes, it was Julian. He was making hand shapes at him. Riley scrubbed her face with her sleeve and interpreted, saying, "Julian says you're bleeding." Jude sat up and looked over his shirt, which was covered in Cassia's blood. He lifted it and found a couple of long scratches up his side that he hadn't noticed before, probably from the rocks. Julian scooted around Cassia to get closer and touched Jude's stomach where it was blank in front. then looked up at Jude with a question on his face. "I don't have one," Jude said, then added by way of explanation, "I don't have a mom." Julian's face suddenly broke open, and he signed, rapidly, furiously through tears. His scent flickered with sadness, grew with anger, and dimmed with grief. Jude didn't need Riley to interpret. He pulled Julian into him and held on tight. Riley had told him they were on their way to meet people who would take them somewhere new, somewhere safe for delines. But Jude didn't know what safe meant anymore. Dr. Mira had given him things and promised to keep him safe, but she had hidden behind lies. Dr. Collett had never lied, but he had taken Julian. Cassia had been safe because she loved Jude. Yet Riley was safe even though she barely knew him. Jude felt as tumbled in his feelings as he had been in the water. Where's the air? Where was the truth? Safe didn't mean not dangerous. Not lying didn't stop someone from being lethal. Cassia had been all of it. She'd given and taken, lied and killed. Julian reached out, wrapping his arms around Jude's neck. It made Jude's thoughts pause. In the stillness, with his son in his arms, his mate at his knees, and the friends all around them, he realized that being safe wasn't something inside people. It was something that lived between them.